All right. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, it's working. So, yeah, today I'm looking forward to just giving you a window into how we're thinking about mobilizing our tracking studies. And I think what I'm going to talk about, we've really already heard over the last sort of day and a half. So, as a presenter, that's not such great news for me because I'm not going to be delivering groundbreaking, earth-shattering news. At the same time, I think as an industry, it's actually quite heartening because it means that we are doing the research and we're actually coming out with some fairly similar results. Okay, so setting the scene, and I don't really need to do this at all, but ready or not, whether we like it or not, multi-mode surveys are here. Those surveys that we're creating for the larger screens, respondents are taking them on their mobile devices. Now, I've seen a number of different figures from the low end of 5% all the way up to 40, 50% of those coming in on a mobile device. Whether it is at the low end, it doesn't matter. I think it's fairly safe to say, and most people in this room would agree, that within a few short years, mobile will be sort of the dominant mode. And of course, by then, and as we saw in this session this morning, there's going to be plenty of new screens on the horizons for us to worry about, not least glass that we heard about, but on our wrists, on our walls or countertops. So using this as the context for where we are, I think and again, I think so many people here agree with this, that it isn't about mobile only, it is about device agnostic. We need to let respondents interact with us when they want, where they want, and most importantly, on the device of their choice. So this is the kind of the backdrop of where we set out. And now, as General Mills told us last year at this conference in Minneapolis, and Ryan mentioned again yesterday, they told us that mobile research is not lift and shift, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that resonated with me at the time, and I think it's something that, you know, we should pay attention to. There are a lot of considerations. There are a lot of new areas to think through, not least on the technical front. But at the same time, we really must rely upon, use the survey methods, principles, best practices that you know, have been developed many, many years ago. They still stand, and we must use them as our foundation. So the research here that I'm going to talk about on what's informed our let's say, best practices as we're moving towards is some R&D research that we're doing, multi-cell, sort of taking tracking studies, moving them from the 20, 25 minutes down to half that, about 10 minutes. We've also had some clients that have dipped their toes in the water and undertaking mobile studies. And we've been involved in some broader Kantar research. So all of this is kind of feeding into where our thinking's at. Today I'm going to talk about two areas, sample and questionnaire design. So let's kick off with sample. One of the big questions we had was, what kind of respondents, where do we get the respondents on mobile device, and how do they differ from those that are competing on a PC? And I think it's quite nicely summed up by our client here, Jim Colv, who's the Director of Consumer Insights from Career Education Corporation. And the poor man, sample's haunting him, you know, saying, who are we leaving out? Who are we ignoring? Which consumers and which voices are we amplifying that maybe we shouldn't be? And so that's very much the kind of question, the crux of the question that we came to. So we did a multi-cell test. We took sort of a traditional online panel, and on another cell we had dynamic sourcing, so River, so that brought in online panel, but also web intercept, social media recruitment, rewards program recruitment. And what we found, and perhaps unsurprisingly, is that on the online panel, it was skewing towards older, more Caucasian, higher income, quite a fairly notable percentage, over 125,000. On the flip side, what we saw with the dynamic sourcing was it was younger, sort of under the ages of 35, ethnically more diverse, lower incomes, sort of under the 30,000 being more highly represented. Now this was amplified when you think about when you bring in the mode of response, so mobile versus PC. And what we particularly found with mobile respondents coming in via dynamic sourcing was a higher percentage of African American respondents. Now taking this further and digging into our data a bit more, we also saw some interesting differences beyond demographics. And I'm just going to focus on the two areas, sort of the two opposite end of the spectrum. If you look at those people coming in from an online panel completing on a mobile device, it was quite interesting that we found that it was nearly 60%, 59% of users were iPhone users. And on the flip side, those people coming in on a mobile device or responding on a mobile, coming in by dynamic sourcing, the majority of them, 66%, actually had an Android device. Now, I should have mentioned in the study that we were doing here, we focused on technology and telecommunications brands. And so unsurprisingly, what we saw that there was a greater brand affiliation depending on what kind of device they had, which impacted our data. So when we actually had a look into this, conducted a driver's analysis, and controlled for age, income, and brand affiliation, we found that the differences in the data could be found as a result of the sample composition as opposed to the mode of response. So positive finding, I think, again, is one that's mirroring what we've already heard, is that there's not mode differences between PC and mobile. And really the key point that I want to make here is it's the sample composition. You've really got to understand who's in your study, where they're coming from, and that those is not just demographics, the devices that they have can play a role, particularly in certain categories. So to sum up, we do need to be device agnostic. We're going to be missing people if you don't let them take it on the device of their choice. You've got to really understand your sample. You've got to know who they're coming in from. One of the things I should have said, even when we dug into the dynamic sourcing and the different levels like social media recruitment versus rewards program recruitment, we saw differences there, and quite marked ones as well. So understanding all of those different pieces helped us inform our analysis, and that's what we're saying embed. Take this information, embed it in your data set, and use it to inform your analysis. Okay, so moving on to questionnaire design. This, for me, is an area I'm so passionate about, and I feel as if it just doesn't get nearly enough airtime. And I'm going to have here a quote from, taken from a book, Designing Effective Web Surveys by Mick Cooper. He's a professor at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And if you've not had a look at this book, even though it's 2008, it's really well worth going back to. There's a lot of fantastic stuff in there that still stands the test of time. But as he points out, design is holistic. Respondents don't care, and they won't know that one person wrote the questions, another programmed it, and yet another designed the interface. And as we know, that actually leads to a bit of a disconnect between the way that, the surveys that we're putting on screen. And this is important. I mean, this is really important for any survey on any mode that you're taking. I think for mobile, it's particularly important because the parameters are so much tighter. And this leads me into talking about usability and user experience and how fundamental it is when we're thinking about mobile devices. So just a few thoughts here, taken from Jacob Nielsen's book, Mobile Usability. Consider that the lack of context on a small screen means that it's much harder to comprehend text. In fact, that increases the cognitive load. So much so that it's twice as hard to comprehend the text that you're reading on a mobile device as to post something that's larger on a PC or a laptop. Also consider that we're asking people to complete a survey. We want them to be thinking about, okay, yeah, I understand that question, and what are my response options, and make a good choice about how they're answering. Not be thinking, what was the question again? So we really need to take this into account, and we need to design surveys that are easy to read and scan. Now, at the same time, in really thinking about the user experience element of it, unless the stylus is coming back anytime soon, and maybe sadly, I don't think it is, we're going to have that fat finger syndrome in the sense that people have to use their fingers to hit the response option. If we don't design it in a way that, different finger sizes, but even still, if it's too difficult, they're having to zoom in and out, it just becomes an unusable experience. We're going to, get dropouts or just bad data. So we need to keep all of these things and more in mind when we're designing our questionnaires, and that, I think, is something we can't get away from for mobile. So moving on to the questionnaire. So I was talking about we're moving our tracking studies. These are 20, 25 minutes long. And how do you go? I think somebody mentioned yesterday about how there's actually quite a lot of redundant questions in your tracking study that, maybe if it's been going on for years. So I really feel it's a kind of an exercise in letting go of all of those, and it can be quite cathartic. I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed the sessions when we were just cutting things out. I was like, we should be doing this anyway, but at least maybe mobile's making us have to take that step. Now there's a number of tools and techniques that I'm sure you're all familiar with that we can use to help us in this exercise. We can use advanced analytics, driver, structure, factor analysis to hone in on maybe related or unique attributes that you feel that you want to keep or you can discard. You could take a step back and have an experimental design and look and explore how elements are interplaying with one another or a desired outcome. You could really take a step back and say, I'm going to rethink this questionnaire, and I'm going to go back out and do a qualitative deep dive, speak to my target, maybe explore more about the topic at hand, and then rethink the questionnaire from that point. But at the end of the day, we mustn't forget the human element, those people that know the brand, what needs to be analyzed, the purpose of the research. And so we must go back and speak to the brand managers, the product owners, to really make sure that we're on target with what this analysis needs to achieve. Now, at the same time as letting go, and being short and sweet, we need to be smart about what to keep. In terms of question wording, I think Kurt already said about, we can get something down to just, so would you buy this? That's exactly what we need to do. We need to go very succinct, and we need to cut out any surplus language, but make sure that we're keeping the essence of the question or the attribute. What is it that we're trying to measure? Likewise, we want less questions, but at the same time, we must keep enough. Don't skimp on the demographics, psychographics, and make you really be able to understand who's in your study and be able to analyze the data in sort of accordingly and meaningfully. Now, we've heard a lot about optimizing cross modes. I've talked and focused on mobile, but let me just remind you, I think this is very much about being device agnostic. So maybe starting with mobile and starting with the lowest common denominator in that sense, but we mustn't forget about our other screens, and we must optimize across modes, keeping the look and the feel, the question wording consistent, whilst also making sure that it functions and it appears correctly across screens. And part of that is, of course, we need a good, strong technical base. But one, I feel that researchers really should be involved in this process as well. So just in quick and summary, in terms of best practices or things to keep in mind when we're designing these sort of shorter questionnaires, usability, I think I may have mentioned that I think that's really important. We do need to keep this in mind. We need to reduce the questions, the question wordings, but we need to make sure that we're smart about it, keep the essence, keep the right number of demographic, psychographic data, and optimize across all screens. Now, just before wrapping up, one other piece that for us as we're looking towards our tracking studies and moving forward is this idea of data integration. Do you know there's a number of different data streams out there? We've all heard a lot about big data. So let's see, what can you bring in to inform your analysis? How can you look at together? In this example here for our telecommunications client, we actually took their campaign data for TV and digital. Then we took social data, their online video and social buzz. In this case, we used website visits because that was important to them. It could be bookings, it could be sales. We combined this with our survey metrics and conducted a driver's analysis to understand, and again, in this instance, what was important was actually changing behavior. So they wanted to understand which of these was having the most impact on change of behavior. So just to wrap up, we started with mobile. We've talked about best practices in sample, in questionnaire design. But really, what we feel moving forward is that it isn't just about mobile. Mobile is the context, it's the framework that's setting this all off. It's about a new, smarter way of tracking, new, smarter way of doing research. That ultimately, if we do incorporate all these things, we think about our sample, we think about our questionnaire very, very carefully, and we bring in data that we've already got, we integrate the different streams, then it's going to provide a better return on investment for the research and ultimately for the brand itself. And that's it. I'll take any questions.
I just had a question about being device agnostic. Is there a particular software or approach to making the survey device agnostic? Because we have investigated that and we did not see anything readily that does that quickly and easily.
I think the technical challenges is one of the big ones that we've got. I think that, no, there's no one size that fits all in terms of the technical platform. You're obviously wanting a responsive design, the one that looks great on mobile, that can resize, so it's the same design, but just detects what device it is and then resizes accordingly, or has the instructions to act accordingly. To your question, no, there isn't one piece of software that gets you there. I think there's a lot more to be done on the technical base.
Here's another.
So have you done anything, have you done any studies using apps to collect the data as opposed to using mobile to collect the data? And if so, are there any best practices in using apps for data collection?
You know, I think apps are an interesting one. We've only done a few, so I don't have a lot to give there. I think it really depends. For me, apps is about being very fit for purpose, because you need to get somebody to download the app. We might have that in a panel, but if you're thinking for more ad hoc, like one-off studies, we're probably not going to get people to download it. It can be really good because you're having a more sort of optimized experience for that device. But aside from that, it really just depends on the purpose of your research. If it's longitudinal, I think they're really good for qualitative research. At the moment, that's where I'm very hopeful for apps, and that's how I use it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.